This is a nice little city. Weather's good too. We've got it's about 72 degrees Saturday. Not bad. Not too crowded, not too fast. Tempting. side. Kinds of ethnic food out here. Sweet. Okay.
At spectrum.com/business.
This is Daniel. I'm relaxing in my hotel room in Kangaroo Sack, Greenland, and I just finished a day hiking on the ice sheet. This podcast was recorded at
12:02 p.m. on September 22nd, 2023.
Things may have changed by the time you hear this, but I'll still be in Greenland working on a personal project for the next 2 months. Okay, here's the show.
Wow, that's a cold hike. Very.
Yeah, what was the Trump era story about Greenland? I can't remember. Wasn't there
We're
like
gonna buy it.
We were gonna buy it, right? I completely forgot about that until
We didn't
right
buy it
now.
after all.
No, it's not ours. Hey there, it's the NPR Politics Podcast. Closer every single day, guys. That is the day that this government shutdown. We've been talking about it for weeks, if not months at this point, and it is next week. So, Deirdre, let's just start there. How likely is it that the government shuts down?
Very likely. I don't, at this point, see how we avoid a shutdown. Never say never when you cover Congress, because things can happen and deadlines do force people to act quickly. But we are in a sort of unprecedented, I would say, sort of level of dysfunction where, both the House and Senate need to pass something that the president will sign to fund the government.
Take the next right onto Ramirez Boulevard, then turn left onto Downtown West Boulevard. Turn left onto Downtown West Boulevard.
For some period of time, because they just don't have the time and the space and the ability to negotiate the 12 annual spending bills. So we're waiting to see whether they can pass some sort of like 30-day stopgap.
In a quarter mile, turn right onto Gleason Drive.
But right now, it's nothing's moving, and as of today, Friday, the House has gone home for the weekend. They were just yesterday expected to stick around and work until they figured something out, but I think we're sort of preparing.
Take the second right onto Gleason Drive.
To cover the shutdown and wondering how long it might last and how we'll get out of it.
Claudia, what are the disagreements here that are holding up all these bills from moving forward?
There are many more.
Continue for 2 miles.
The bills themselves, for example, it seems like there's different factions of the Republican wing that are just basically breaking down over a series of issues, from top-line numbers, if they were able to get down to a permanent spending plan and pass all of these annual spending bills in return, and down to optional in terms of additional spending, such as whether to provide aid to areas that have been struck by disasters from Hawaii to Vermont, as well as whether to provide additional aid to Ukraine. And so a lot of Republicans were trying to hammer out some creative ideas this week. They started out the week, for example, with the Main Street Caucus, so these are the more moderate members, and members of the House Freedom Caucus, members in that wing, more the hardliners, got together to put together a proposed continuing resolution, as it's called, or the stopgap funding measure.
Head south towards South Gallagher View Road, then turn right onto South Gallagher View Road.
How am I gonna get out of here? I have to cut across.
not enough to move through the floor this week. So it just shows you how far apart even Republicans are in the House.
Deirdre, you said the phrase unprecedented dysfunction a second ago, and I'm going to press you on that because listeners of this podcast know that there's been a lot of dysfunction in Congress in recent years, and this is not our first government shutdown. Why is this one different?
I think this one is different because the last time the government had a shutdown 5 years ago, Congress had agreed on a couple of those individual spending bills that Claudia was talking about. For example, the one that funds the Pentagon, the one that funds, VA programs. So while it was a government shutdown, it was a partial government shutdown. I mean, I think there were something like 800,000 federal workers that were affected, but this time around, Congress hasn't done any of the funding bills, so it would be a shutdown of essentially all the federal agencies. Now, the government does prepare, and federal workers at TSA, border security agents, national security interests are protected, and those essential workers will still be going to work. But a lot of the members of Congress who are serving now weren't in Congress in the last shutdown. And a lot of the hard right members that Claudia was talking about continue to say, no one's going to notice a shutdown that's happening in Washington, in my district. And some of the more veteran Republicans who lived through that shutdown and maybe lived through the shutdown 10 years ago in 2013 over Republicans trying to shut down the government to repeal Obamacare, they say, look, we've been there. We're going to get blamed. The people that forced the shutdown get blamed. And they're warning these newer members that people will notice. So, and a lot of them are just thinking maybe they have to learn the lesson, but they're already predicting we're going to be the ones blamed, and we're going to be the ones that have to pick up the pieces and figure out how to get out.
In a quarter mile, use any lane to turn left to stay on Ebenezer Road.
Yeah, that's another tough situation in terms of when we look at the scope of how workers could be affected, and even the military. What Deirdre mentioned, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy touched on this earlier in the week, and we could say maybe when he was more optimistic they were going to get some traction on their Republican proposal. And
use any lane to turn left to stay on Ebenezer Road.
And he talked about the weakening of the national security posture that the U.S. would present if its own military is not getting their regular pay and are essentially expected to work for free during this period of indefinite shutdown if we were to see something like that happen.
Well, I've seen a lot of reporting kind of indicating this impending shutdown
Continue on Ebenezer Road for half a mile.
really spells trouble for House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Can you all detail a little bit why that is and what a potential shutdown would mean for his future as Speaker?
Well, I think part of it is we're seeing echoes here of his initial fight even to get the Speaker's gavel, as we all
In a
remember.
quarter mile, turn right onto Westland Drive.
It was 15 brutal rounds before he was able to do that. A lot of infighting within his own party to get there. And then this summer, it was a revisiting with the debt limit fight. And of course, now he is seeing the fallout when it comes to these threats of facing a government shutdown, because he's seeing members of his own party, members of the House Freedom Caucus, complain that he gave too much during that debt limit fight, that he helped get that legislation through to lift the debt ceiling with the help of Democrats. They don't want to see that again. And so now, third time, he's going around with a lot of strong critics in his own wing. So that's
Take the next right onto Westland Drive.
He's facing a lot more trouble this time around. And we're hearing more of these vocal threats to move by Republicans, such as Matt Gaetz of
Continue on Westland Drive for 2 miles.
Florida, to try and remove McCarthy from his post.
Right, remember, he only has a 4-seat majority. And a lot of Republicans say, look, there's 200 House Republicans who solidly support Speaker McCarthy. There's not really anyone else in the House Republican Conference who can get the job. And we saw that play out in January, right? It took him 15 rounds, but all these other names that were floated, they didn't have more than 9 votes or 8 votes or something. And I think that's still the case. I think he broadly still has support among most House Republicans, but because he agreed to these demands during that January fight to be elected speaker, only one member needs to stand up and file this motion to essentially oust him. And now you have Matt Gaetz, who negotiated that deal, openly talking about it and threatening it and saying the minute he starts working with Democrats, you know, the Capitol moving truck should just roll up to his office and start moving him out. I mean, we're in divided government. I think a lot of House Republicans continue to say, like, look, there's a Democrat in the White House and Democrats run the Senate. We're going to eventually have to pass something with bipartisan support. So that's sort of the reality we live in. Yet there is still this group of hardliners that Claudia was talking about who really just are mad that they can't affect the kind of change that they were demanding in January when they negotiated with McCarthy in terms of massive spending cuts. And so I think a lot of members think it's inevitable that there will be a vote by the end of the year to oust McCarthy. It's just sort of unclear, sort of like when it will happen, who would even be in the running to replace him. Right now, there's really no one. But I do think the shutdown is the trigger point.
I always think it's important whenever we talk about the government shutdown to talk about the real world impacts, right? I mean, the federal government is the nation's largest employer. This thing that's a political football in Congress is going to have real world effects all over the country. Do you get a sense that lawmakers on the Hill understand or are taking that into account as they're deciding what to do about this?
I think some of them are. I mean, I think the newer ones haven't lived through it before. I talked to Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski last week.
In a quarter mile, turn left onto the I-140 East ramp to Maryville.
About this idea that some conservatives were downplaying that it would have an impact at all, and she's like, have them come to Alaska. October 1st is the day that crab fishermen in Alaska need federal permits to start their harvest. And that was a problem in the last shutdown. So I can tell you that is a problem, and we had to work out a whole situation last time to address it. Idaho Republican Mike Simpson says there are federal...
Turn left onto the I-140 East ramp.
Firefighters who are running out of pay, and we're in the middle of a devastating season.
In a quarter mile, merge onto I-140 East.
Where they're already overworked, and what if they just stop getting paid? So there are a lot of federal workers who work in states around the country. Obviously, Washington is sort of the foil that a lot of conservatives put out there as like, no one cares, all these workers in Washington are not that productive, but there are a lot of agencies that affect and touch people's lives across the country.
Yeah, some would argue that maybe seeing those real-world impacts is what could move some of these members, as Deirdre mentioned, who haven't lived through this before. And to carry your analogy of the political football, there is a chance of a Hail Mary in the next week where something could work out. Perhaps the Senate could send a bill over to the House, and maybe the House will reconsider their posture. But that all said, it's one argument I've heard from a few folks is that maybe a shutdown is what's going to be needed to put pressure on House members to move on this.
All right, we can leave it there for now. This is obviously going to be the story we're talking about, at least for the next week, but potentially for the next few weeks. Deirdre and Claudia, get up, stretch your legs. We'll have you back for Can't Let It Go. Thank you.
Thank you. Sounds good. Yeah, sounds good.
Support for NPR and the following message come from ABC, presenting Celebrity Jeopardy! America's favorite quiz show gets the star treatment when an all-new season of Celebrity Jeopardy! Comes to ABC in prime time. Hosted by Ken Jennings, the competition will be heated and often hilarious as this season's powerhouse celebrities battle it out to win $1 million for their favorite charity. Celebrity Jeopardy! Premieres Wednesday, 8, 7 Central on ABC and stream on Hulu. This message comes from NPR sponsor Spectrum Business. Running a small business takes grit and determination, and a communications provider that's got your back, like Spectrum Business. Get fast, reliable internet, communication tools that let you work from anywhere on any device, and a free mobile line for 1 year. Visit spectrum.com/business to learn how Spectrum Business can help keep your business going no matter what comes your way.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Citi. They're not writers, but they help you shape your financial story. They're not a startup, but their innovation labs create new tools to help keep your information secure. They're not architects, but they help build stronger communities. With global expertise and over 2 centuries of experience, Citi provides tools, insights, and guidance to help businesses thrive. They're not just any bank. They are Citi. Learn more at citi.com/weareciti.
And we're back, and joining us now is Franco Ordonez. Hi, Franco.
Hey, Miles.
And also joining us, Danielle Kurtzleben. Hi, Danielle.
Hi, it's been forever. I was out on parental leave, but I missed you all very much.
We missed you, too.
We missed you.
Oh,
And you've been out on the trail, which I'm sure you missed as well.
I really did, yes.
Yeah, well, it's going to be a lot of that the next year and a half, I think, to make up for lost time. So you've noticed specifically something about how the candidates in the Republican primary are talking about abortion. Tell us more.
Yeah, and let me start by just giving a big picture context in terms of where Republicans are on abortion right now politically, right? Because the general consensus is that abortion cost Republicans in the midterms in 2022. And furthermore, we've seen evidence that that kind of thing's true in the ballot measures on abortion. We've seen in state after state that have had ballot measures on abortion since then, including quite red states, is that voters want more abortion rights than fewer. So, Republicans, you would think, would want to be pretty careful in how they're talking about abortion. But the thing is, Republicans also want to differentiate themselves from each other within this field. So this is where they all are right now, is trying to walk this line of talking about abortion, but not wanting to say something that could, down the road, alienate general election voters, or even primary voters who feel a little more moderate on abortion, right? So Trump in particular has been doing something really interesting. Trump has first of all been very much taking a victory lap, or his second, third, fourth victory lap when it comes to Dobbs, when it comes to overturning Roe, because the 3 Supreme Court justices that he got onto the court very much set the stage for the overturn of Roe to happen. So in his speeches, he celebrates that. At the same time, he will chastise other Republicans, saying, you don't know how to talk about abortion and win elections. I do. But he won't come down anywhere firmly on where his position is on abortion. He flat out refuses to. He has been non-committal on a national 15-week abortion ban, which many of his opponents are in favor of. And he has, for example, criticized other candidates' abortion positions, like Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida. He signed a 6-week bill in Florida. Trump has said, I don't like that. But when he has been pressed, like by NBC's Kristen Welker on
In 2 miles, take exit 11A for US 129 South toward Alcoa, Maryville.
last weekend, he would not come down to how many weeks he will support.
People are starting to think of 15 weeks. That seems to be a number that people are talking about right now.
Would you sign that?
I would sit down with both sides and I'd negotiate something, and we'll end up with peace in that issue for the first time in 52 years. I'm not going to say I would or I wouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think he recognizes the political danger there. I mean, he is definitely, as he, often does, is trying to have it both ways. I mean, it was after the midterms, as you were kind of pointing out, where many pointed to abortion as the reason why, one of the big reasons why Republicans did poorly in those elections. And Trump very clearly, very soon after, blamed it on Republicans and so many legislatures' positions on abortion. So it's not, shouldn't necessarily be a surprise that he's trying to find some wiggle room in making these cases that he knows how to talk about abortion, whereas some of his Republican opponents do not. But I'm also not surprised that he's not being very decisive and definitive and purposeful in the ways that he's saying he will be, and exact, because I think he...
In half a mile, take exit 11A for US 129 South toward Alcoa, Maryville.
Recognizes that can put him in some danger too if he's too specific.
One thing to add to that, where the line he seems to have settled on is, I set the stage for our party to be able to negotiate.
Take exit 11A.
So before Roe fell, you all didn't even get to have any room to decide where we want this. Well, now I have opened this up.
Continue on US 129 South for 4 miles.
now we can have a conversation with Democrats about where we want the line to be in terms of number of weeks. So he's turning to his old standby of, I'm the negotiator. But on a topic like abortion, where people have very firm, often pretty black and white views, at the very least quite firm views, and a lot of people don't know how much they want to compromise on it, I'm very curious how well that line sells him to voters, particularly conservative Christian voters, like there are in places like Iowa.
Well, it's so interesting because I feel like what we're kind of seeing is Trump almost looking ahead past the primary toward the general election and being a little worried about wading too much into this issue that very clearly could come back to bite him later in the year. Franco, you've done some reporting on this, that it seems like as a candidate, he is almost looking past the primary field, right?
Yeah, there's no question about that. I mean, I think, he's barely spending any money. His campaign and his super PACs have completely kind of pulled back on the money that they're spending on attack ads. I think in August, it was like some of the last money that was spent on DeSantis, and now he's really boosted the numbers against Biden in more than $1 million. He's also putting his thumb on the scale on the shutdown, clearly using that as another reason to attack Biden. He's, skipping next week's Republican debate. I know you guys talked about that earlier in the week. He's going to skip the debate and, really, go at an area that is a favorite of Biden. Biden often calls himself the most pro-union president. And now Trump is actually going to visit with Detroit auto workers and kind of try to curry favor with them. So I think it's very clear to Trump and the Trump campaign that they are looking ahead and really looking now at his opponents, his Republican opponents, in the rearview mirror.
Have we gotten any sense from President Biden on how he's going to respond to some of these attacks from former President Trump?
Yeah, so it's been really interesting. For months and months, Biden would rarely even utter Trump's name. And, there's a lot of political reasons for that. He wants to focus for as long as he can on being the president and being presidential and having, kind of a rose garden campaign is kind of how it's often described. By attacking Trump, it really gets into the campaign season, and there's concern that that's all you're going to talk about. But Biden's starting to do that, but he's doing it in more private fundraising events. He was just in New York this week, where he attacked Trump with some of the sharpest language today. He actually told a group of supporters at a New York theater that Trump and his supporters, his quote-unquote MAGA supporters, are, quote, determined to destroy American...
In half a mile, keep left to continue on Tennessee 35 North.
Democracy. So that's pretty direct. And he also said that he thought it was clear that Trump is destined to be the nominee, and that defending democracy was going to be a key theme in his re-election campaign.
Keep left to continue on Tennessee 35 North.
That, of course, was a theme in his 2020 campaign and his 2022 message during the midterms. It is very interesting to watch the evolution of Biden's language toward Trump because you can't necessarily turn back once you start attacking. That said, he is still trying to be careful in doing it in private events. It'll be interesting to watch. Will he start to do that more publicly as well, when the cameras and the microphones are in front of him?
And turning back to abortion, I would add that there has also been some, not private, but some indirect jabs from the Biden-Harris campaign towards Republicans. I say indirect because it's not directly from the horse's mouth here. Rather, ahead of Trump's speeches in South Dakota and Iowa recently, the Biden camp bought some digital ads highlighting Republican positions on abortion, so that people in those states would hear this message ahead of and around the time that Trump was speaking in the state as well. And really, this kind of highlights also that Democrats are very, very ready to make reproductive rights a big part of 2024. And one place you can see this, I would add, is the Virginia State House races that are underway right now. in Virginia, we have this off-off year election, and we often see this as a preview of the presidential campaign. The Republicans are very much focusing on parental rights, quote unquote, in that state. Things like how race and gender and sex are taught in schools. Democrats are focusing very heavily on reproductive rights. So Democrats and Republicans are watching that state, and they're already primed to focus on those two things, parental rights and abortion, in the 2024 general election.
All right, time for a quick break. Franco and Danielle, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
When we get back, time for Can't Let It Go.
Support for this NPR podcast and the following message come from MD Anderson Cancer Center, again named #1 in the nation for cancer care by U.S. News and World Report's Best Hospitals rankings. Their physicians treat more types of cancer in a day than many see in their whole career. This unmatched depth of expertise, combined with MD Anderson's groundbreaking discoveries, gives their patients access to the most innovative treatment options. Learn more at mdanderson.org. This message comes from NPR sponsor Shopify. No idea where to sell? Shopify puts you in control of every sales channel. It is the commerce platform revolutionizing millions of businesses worldwide. Whether you're a garage entrepreneur or IPO ready, Shopify is the only tool you need to start, run, and grow your business without the struggle. Once you've reached your audience, Shopify has the internet's best converting checkout to help you turn them from browsers to buyers. Go to shopify.com/NPR to take your business to the next level today. Support for NPR and the following message come from Saatva. Saatva luxury mattresses are every bit as elegant as the most expensive brands, but because they're sold online, they're about half the price. Visit SAATVA.com/NPR and save an additional $200.
And we are back with our Capitol Hill team, Deirdre Walsh and Claudia Crisales. Hi, guys.
Hey, Miles.
Hey there.
And it is now time for my personal favorite part of the show, Can't Let It Go, the part where we talk about the things during the week that we just can't let go of, politics or otherwise. Claudia, do you want to get us started?
I can get us started. So I just want to note, I have a different Can't Let It Go this week versus last week, but I will never let go of Taylor Swift from last week. And just note it. That's permanent.
Noted. All right, we've got it noted. Claudia cannot let go of Taylor Swift. All right, you can move on now.
So the latest obsession, however, is good TV and this drought of a writers, actors strike that never seems to end. And so that's holding me over. For example, the morning show is back. And so thank goodness I'm binging the heck out of that every time an episode pops up. Like last night, I'm running to go see it. And it's a really good cast. And it, sometimes it veers into the very, very fictional idea of what it's like to be in broadcast journalism. But hey, I will roll with it for these desperate times. And then meanwhile, I'm looking forward to a lot more shows that are coming. The Kardashians, it's the family I love to hate. And so I have to watch that show. I'm counting. I keep refreshing. I'm like, are you sure you're not back yet? So I have to wait about one more week, but I'm counting down. And I'm also refreshing updates on Larry David's Curb Your Enthusiasm. He's supposed to be back this year. So I am counting down to him as well. So thank goodness for these times in terms of these strike times that can hold us over with still some great shows out there. That is fine.
I'm a fan of the morning show too.
You are?
I watched it? Yeah, I watched the first episode this season, but I think I haven't caught up on the newest ones.
In a quarter mile, use the right 2 lanes to turn left onto US 321 North, East Lamar Alexander Parkway.
I think it's a little off the mark as someone who used to work in cable news.
Yeah.
But I love a good soap opera, and you're right, it has an awesome cast.
So you guys are cool with doing, like, watching TV about broadcast journalism, being in you don't get off work and you're like, I want to go on.
Use the right 2 lanes to turn left onto US 321 North, East Lamar Alexander Parkway.
Ted Lasso or whatever,
Continue on US 321 North for 17 miles.
to live in, like, soccer world. You're, like, cool just diving right back into broadcast world.
I think it's an escape either way. It's some drama.
Right? Yeah, it's like, what does Jennifer Aniston have to say about broadcast journalism in this character? I have
I'm
to
sold.
know.
Fair enough.
So, Miles, what can you not let go of?
The thing I cannot let go of is I'm going to go back to my theater kid roots here.
Oh.
We had a Tiny Desk concert published this week with the Broadway cast of Wicked. which I was listening to the Tiny Desk concert on my walk to work today, and just like completely transported me back to being age 12 when my mom took me to, it was my first time in New York City, and it was like a week or two before Christmas, and we went and saw Wicked, and like it is one of like my core most magical memories of my mom is seeing Wicked with her, and so I was just like, I don't know, it was a really beautiful thing to remember. And I don't know if you guys taken your kids to New York City before, or has that been?
have, and we actually took my family and my brother's family. We took all our kids to Wicked probably like Christmas before the pandemic.
Oh, nice.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was really cold, and it was a great show.
Yeah, it's always a great show. I mean, Defying Gravity. I just
Great show, great song,
I got chills walking to work today listening to it. So shout out to my mom. Thank you very much for doing that. Deirdre, what camp do you let go of?
Well, it's shutdown related, but not related to politics. But there was actually a partial shutdown at Disney World this week because a black bear wandered into the Magic Kingdom in Orlando as all kinds of people were trying to get on rides, and evidently they started to shut down, and people were like, what's going on? Conservation officials ended up having to rescue the bear, bring it back to its natural habitat, evidently 90 miles away from Orlando. I always think of them as having to rescue, people from being exposed to alligators, but
I was going to say, it's nice to hear a Florida story it's not about a gator.
I was surprised that they had to rescue people being exposed from a bear in Orlando.
They probably watched a Disney movie and was inspired to make the pilgrimage to the Magic Kingdom. I don't see what the issue is.
They're bears, they're just like us.
That is a wrap for this week. Our executive producer is Mathoni Maturi. Eric McDaniel is our editor. Our producers are Elena Moore and Casey Morrell. Thanks to Krishnadev Kalamer and Lexi Shapital. I'm Miles Parks. I cover voting.
I'm Deirdre Walsh. I cover Congress.
And I'm Claudia Gonzalez. I also cover Congress.
And thank you for listening to the NPR Politics Podcast.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Spectrum Business. Spectrum Business is made to work the way small business works. That's why Spectrum Business provides internet, phone, and mobile services that are made to work as hard as you do. Learn more at spectrum.com/work.
How's it, everybody, and welcome to another episode of How's This Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. We rocking today, me and Brada Brand with Cool Brada. We got to check him out at the Ale Coco Fish Pond the other day. Please give a warm welcome for Brada Peleke Flores. Brada, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Yeah. So, hey, first off, congrats. You know what I mean? Yeah. Congrats on.
Yeah, you just had one baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, what was it, the other morning?
Yeah.
He calls me like, oh, we gotta cancel. I'm like, okay. He's like, oh yeah, you just have a baby. I was like, okay. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good reason for cancel.
Well, like just text response. Out of all the excuses. It's like, it's not a bus life.
Yeah, I was like, of all the excuses, that is the craziest one I ever heard. We was going back and forth, me and Brad. We were like, Brad, did we just text him like, hey, if you never let come, you can just say that.
Yeah. We're just joking around, man.
Yeah.
Congrats.
Yeah, congrats.
And then you're here 2 days later. I was like, oh, he's coming. I was like, oh, jeez.
I had to eat all the kids and sit there next to the kids. Okay, I'll be in the space.
President Biden is going to Michigan to support the United Auto Workers Union strike.
Workers at dozens more locations have gone off the job, even though the union says it is getting somewhere with Ford.
I'm Scott Simon.
I'm Aisha Roscoe, and this is Up First from NPR News.
Say it loud! As we get ready for that notification for us to get ready to walk out on the picket line.
But what will the auto workers strike mean for consumers?
The House Republicans didn't agree on a temporary spending plan this week. It increases the chances of government shutdown.
Will they be able to avoid it?
And the Census Bureau wants to now know your sexual orientation.
It says the information can help fight discrimination.
Please stay with us. We've got the news you need to start your weekend.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Citi. They're not an airline, but their network connects global businesses in nearly 160 local markets. With over 2 centuries of experience, they're not just any bank, they're Citi. More at citi.com/weareciti. This message comes from NPR sponsor State Farm. What if your life story was a new podcast series? Would it be a comedy, an action-packed thrill ride? No matter which genre, State Farm is there for your what-ifs, which means they help keep your life story from becoming a mystery. You can reach them 24/7, file a claim on the State Farm mobile app, or simply call your agent to ask what's on your mind. It's how insurance plays a supporting role, no matter your story. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Call or go to statefarm.com for a quote today.
This message comes from Pushkin Industries. In a 6-episode series from his podcast, Revisionist History, Malcolm Gladwell explores everything Americans get wrong about guns. Find Revisionist History with Malcolm Gladwell wherever you get your podcasts.
The United Auto Workers Union says that it's making progress in talks with Ford.
But not so much with General Motors and Stellantis, the Chrysler parent company.
So dozens more workers at those 2 locations going on strike.
Damn, let's go.
Camila, thanks so much for being with us.
Happy to be here, Scott.
And what's the union's big move here?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, they are splitting the big 3 up, like you said. Now there's Ford on the one hand, and the other 2 on the other hand. With Ford, the union says they've secured some big wins at the table in terms of equalizing pay across different locations, job security provisions, raises that are tied to inflation. And so they say they're basically going easy on Ford now, still at strike on one plant, but not adding any more. On the other 2, the union is expanding the strike to all of the company's parts distribution centers. These are not plants that produce vehicles, but these are basically warehouses that ship out replacement parts to dealerships.
And what do these strikes mean for drivers?
Yeah, so the strikes that started last week didn't have a huge impact and wouldn't for a very long time, but the strikes that just started yesterday could affect people who need a repair on a car. I spoke to Pete DeVito. He's with a different union that represents workers at car dealerships, and he said it's pretty simple.
The technicians can't fix the cars without the parts.
Now, dealers knew this was coming. Many of them stockpiled parts, but once they run through whatever they have locally, people might have to wait longer for a repair. And these parts that get shipped out from these distribution centers, they're tremendously profitable for companies, like people might have suspected if they looked at the price tag for some OEM parts, right? Hugely profitable, so consumers are basically collateral damage here as the union is trying to hit the car companies right in the pocketbook.
What's the companies doing about this?
Yeah, we know that the automakers knew this was a possibility and they were getting ready for this. And these distribution centers, they aren't like an assembly line where it's basically impossible to get it back up and running if all your workers go out. In the 2019 UAW strike against General Motors, there were some salaried workers who were doing some work in these warehouses. I asked DeVito if he thinks the companies could avoid some snarls with their parts by basically doing that again, sending white-collar workers to run the warehouses, and he said this.
You remember when the NFL went on strike many years ago and they brought in the replacement players?
Full disclosure, Scott, I did not.
Yes, I certainly remember it. Let's just say, with all respect, the games were not very good.
Yeah, DeVito put it like this.
Nobody watched. In this case, if you send in a team of account, nobody's going to get their part.
So he's not optimistic about that backup strategy. We'll just have to see. I asked the companies. General Motors said they have contingency plans. They're deciding whether to implement. They wouldn't discuss any further. Stellantis declined to comment.
What's ahead?
Well, you mentioned that President Biden is heading to Michigan to join the picket line, which is very unusual, as I understand it, possibly unprecedented to have a sitting president out on the line. The car companies are really frustrated with the union. Stellantis says they made a competitive offer and haven't heard back at all. GM has called the union's demands untenable. Even Ford, the company where the union said they're making real progress, Ford says there are significant gaps between the company and the union. So talks are continuing, but definitely a possibility that more strikes will come, the strikes will expand again, and it's super hard to predict exactly what that might look like.
Camila Dominowski, thanks so much.
Thanks, Scott.
shutdown. Now seems more possible after a bumpy week on Capitol Hill.
House Republicans couldn't agree on a temporary spending plan and then went home for the weekend.
But when they do return next week, they'll have just a few days to try to figure out if they can avoid a shutdown. There's congressional correspondent Claudia Grisales joins us. Claudia, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
This wasn't a bipartisan divide. This is House Republicans who couldn't reach agreement among themselves, right? Where are they stuck?
Right, in a number of places. They had a lot of arguments over the past week about trying to put forward the most conservative proposal possible to keep the government open just temporarily, just a few more weeks past this approaching deadline. Yet they were breaking down over top-line numbers, over whether to provide additional aid for Ukraine or for public disasters anywhere ranging from Hawaii to Vermont. They did start off the week on a positive note. There was lots of optimism for a bill that was being pushed by House Republican leaders. It was put together by two factions in the House, the Main Street Caucus, which are more moderate Republicans, and the House Freedom Caucus members there who are more along the hardliners direction. But yet too many members in the party were opposed. It was clear by Thursday they were breaking down and could not agree on anything. We can't forget that Republicans hold a very slim majority in the House and they cannot lose much support.
Republicans do keep talking about passing all 12 of the regular spending bills. But is there enough time even for that?
No, and a House Republican-led committee met yesterday to try and hammer out these annual spending bills, but they won't be ready until many, many weeks from now, maybe months, and so that's going to miss that October 1 deadline when we could see a shutdown set in if not even a temporary funding bill is passed by then. So those bills are partisan as well as the stopgap funding bill that was proposed earlier this week, and so they are dead on arrival in the Democratic-led Senate.
Claudia, what's this mean for the coming week?
Well, it's a very high-stakes week. Basically, there's some folks who are hoping for some sort of a Hail Mary move that could get some sort of plan through both the House and the Senate, but House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has previously promised to his members at the beginning of this year that he would give them 72 hours, that's 3 days, and what's left in the remainder of this coming week to hammer out a deal for a temporary funding bill to review a bill before they vote. And this is as McCarthy is facing round 3 of a showdown with his own members. The first was when he took the Speaker's gavel. That was a big fight with his own members of his own conference. And then the second was a debt limit fight, which really weakened his position significantly.
And it raises the question, does he have much of a future?
He is facing more vocal calls to be ousted. It's possible we could see more momentum there from his opponents for him to step down, but this is all tied to the politics of a shutdown as well.
Can the Senate try and speed things up to avoid a government shutdown?
They could try to send over their own plan to the House, but House Republican leaders would have to reassess their position on trying to push a partisan-only bill and reconsider a bipartisan path instead, but that's a very tall order.
And there's Claudia Grisales. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
What is your current gender? And does gay, lesbian, bisexual, straight, or something else represent your identity?
The Census Bureau wants to know your answers next year. It's looking for better statistics about LGBTQ plus people.
They say the info could be used to fight discrimination. NPR's Hansi Lo Wong has been tracking these efforts and joins us now. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Aisha.
So, where might people start seeing these questions?
We're talking about experimental forms for the American Community Survey. That's an annual survey that many households around the country have received. And it's not the once-a-decade census, but it is a major survey. And adding these questions would change a really important set of government statistics. If the White House approves this test, about 500,000 households will be asked to participate.
And everyone living in those households would be asked about their sexual orientation and gender identity?
No, only some of these households would see these test questions, and they would be directed to people age 15 and older. Usually it's one person in a household that fills out the survey for everyone in the home, and that's actually a big focus of this experiment, how people would answer these sexual orientation and gender identity questions on behalf of any others in their household.
And how exactly might this information about sexual orientation and gender identity, how would that help protect LGBTQ plus people from discrimination?
Well, multiple federal agencies have asked the Census Bureau to produce more statistics about sexual orientation and gender identity. The Justice Department, for example, says it needs this data to better enforce laws like the Civil Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, and the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act. There are also a lot of advocates for LGBTQ plus people who've been pushing for this kind of data. I talked to Caroline Medina, the policy director for the Whitman Walker Institute, which focuses on better health care for LGBTQ plus people and people living with HIV. And here's what they told me.
In conversations with policymakers, we are often asked for data on LGBTQI folks, how many folks are accessing a particular program, for example, and often it's really hard to give that answer because of the patchwork of data collection that exists right now.
One way to think about this is the way the U.S. works. If you're not counted in official statistics, it's really difficult to get resources and other support from the government.
This is happening at a time when anti-LGBTQ plus legislation and rhetoric is on the rise from right-wing politicians and groups. I would imagine that might make the Census Bureau's plans for this test a bit more complicated.
Yes, it's been a long road for advocates for more government statistics about LGBTQ plus people to get to this point. A few years ago, I reported on how the Trump administration stopped earlier efforts because officials didn't want questions about sexual orientation and gender identity to be asked. This current political climate does raise questions about how this data could be misused. I should point out, of course, there are federal laws that ban the Census Bureau from publishing people's private information, and the Biden administration has emphasized that federal surveys should allow people to choose whether they share their sexual orientation and gender identity with the government. There's always this tension when you're talking about government statistics. There's a value in being seen, but it comes with the risk that at some point in the future, policies around confidentiality may change or may not be followed.
That's NPR's Hansi Lo Wong. Hansi, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
And that's up first for Saturday, September 23rd, 2023. I'm
Man, it's nice out here. I'm not sure what this area is called. I think it's like Townsend, Tennessee. Nice.
And I'm Aisha Roscoe. Tomorrow on the Sunday Story, my conversation with NPR's Daniel Estrin about his investigation into what really happened the night the Pentagon took out the leader of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi.
The Saturday version of the podcast was produced by Danny Hensel and Fernando Naro.
Our editors are Raphael Nam, Benjamin Swayze, Kelsey Snell, Adil Al-Shauchi, and Melissa Gray. Our director is Michael Radcliffe, with engineering support from Hannah Glovna.
Evie Stone is our senior supervising editor. Sarah Lucy Oliver is our executive producer, and Jim Kane is our deputy managing editor.
And thanks to all those people who work tirelessly, fueled by carbs, candy, and lots of caffeine, as they lend their skills and talents to Weekend Edition as well.
You can hear their work on something called the radio every Saturday and Sunday morning. Find your NPR station at stations.npr.org.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Spectrum Business. Running a small business takes grit and determination, and a communications provider that's got your back. Spectrum Business keeps your business running with fast.
In a quarter mile, continue straight onto East Lamar Alexander Parkway.
Reliable internet, all-in-one communication tools, mobile service, and more. Learn more at spectrum.com/business.
This message comes from NPR sponsor BritBox, streaming new, exclusive, and original.
Continue straight onto East Lamar Alexander Parkway, then turn right.
British TV. Use promo code FRESH at checkout to get 50% off your first month at BritBox.com/NPR.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Amazon Music. With Amazon Music, you get access
Take the next right, then your destination will be on the right.
the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts, all included with your Amazon Prime membership. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app or visit amazon.com/OTG.
Continue on East Lamar Alexander Parkway for half a mile. In 1,000 feet, make a U-turn.
This is Planet Money from NPR.
The Nobel Prize-winning economist...
Couple of different. Okay. Let's see. Let's see how this is set up. Ooh, there's a pool. Sweet.
Did they allow you to check in?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so can we put all the stuff? You will move your car, don't worry. Your car is
No, it
the
seems
one.
like it's only one per...
Yeah, I get that. We'll have to figure out another parking situation.
There's parking in front of the office, that's not a sign.
But... well,